Okay, I'm gonna apologize that it's a little bit loud in my house while I'm making this video. I'm locking my office door so my children can't come in. My daughter's practicing the viola in the next room. She's in 8th grade. She is does not like her schedule to be disrupted. My husband is playing video games in the next room over too. So if you hear him yelling, that is why. But it was a now or never if I wanted to get this ready for next week. So I will be cutting fabric for the penny quilt. I'm making lap size using holiday, I keep forgetting what this collection is called. Holiday Favorites, holiday something. Rifle Paper Co. collection. I have a fat quarter bundle and I've narrowed it down to 21 prints that I will be using for the collection. And I'm using the instructions that hopefully this video and the instructions go out in the same email. That's currently the plan. But I am currently still editing these. So if you get something that looks slightly different than this, it's because I changed it before I sent it out. So basically I am going to be showing you how to cut the fabrics, but I'm also testing and making sure I didn't make any errors at the same time. So I am going to show cutting 2 different ways. One is I will be using a regular long ruler. This is a Creative Grids 8.5 by 24.5 ruler. It's my most used ruler. I use it all the time. It's very functional. It's non-slip. I upgraded from a less expensive ruler a couple of years ago, and I've been very glad I have it. It's fantastic. So I'll be doing that. And I am also going to show you using my stripology ruler. I haven't made this, I made one version of this quilt using fat quarters, but I hadn't written out the instructions. So it's kind of just winging it. And that was the 5 and 10 version that I made since I had a fat quarter bundle. So this is really my first time, just along, same with you. So I have already pressed my fat quarters that I'm going to be cutting to. I think that's really important for accuracy reasons. And I have 6 fat quarters here that I'm going to show you on an A, or 2 A's, 2 B's, and 2 C's. Some fabric A squares from this red print. So I'm going to look at my pattern and I'm going to say, it says cut the number of shapes from each fabric for 4.5 by 4.5 inch squares. So I'm going to cut those. And then notice here for the lap and twin size instructions, there are additional instructions to cut some more pieces. And these don't need to be cut from every fat quarter. You just need this total number from all of the leftovers from your fat quarters. And it's actually best if you get more variety here. Enough talking from me. When I cut fabric, I always fold my fabric in half, and it just makes it so that when I cut my fabric, I have a shorter distance to cut than, you know, the whole way. You're much more likely to have your ruler slip if you're cutting a longer distance. So I'm going to make sure that, you know, that down here at the bottom, see how there's an equal amount of selvage that you can see all the way across here. I don't cut the selvage off until I cut my pieces. But anyway, this helps make sure that I have the fabric folded straight. Because if I had something like this and I was cutting, see how that's not straight? It's not, you're not cutting correctly. So I try to get this as straight as possible. It should kind of feel like that. It should feel right. If you've had a lot of practice, I think you can relate to that. See how it's not exactly lining up here on the edge? That's okay. Because sometimes fat quarters are cut slightly wonky. I'm going to spread it out, make sure we're all good. Okay, so all I need from this piece is 4.5 inch squares. So I'll actually show you this piece with the Creative Grids ruler, or the stripology ruler. And one of the things that I really like about this, and this ruler is not cheap, and I resisted buying one for a long time because of the cost and how large it is. And I'm doing it kind of on the edge of my cutting mat just so I can get it in the camera. So the nice thing about this ruler is it's got all of these horizontal lines, and I'm going to line up the top of my fabric with one of the horizontal lines, and then it has this space right here. Let's see if I can get it so you can see this better. And this, see how it has a 0? When I cut this edge, it trims up it squares up the edge of my fabric, so that is already taken care of. And then I'm going to cut a 4.5 inch strip. So 4.5 inches right here. And I'm just going to cut there, and then I'll have one 4.5 inch strip. So let me see if I can get how much of this I can get in the frame. Sorry guys, I'm not like a professional video person. See if I can expose this a little better. Okay, so first I'm going to square up the edge. Okay, and then I'm going to cut it 4.5 inches. Okay, now I have a strip. This was my part that I cut off on the edge to square up. Here's the rest of my fabric. And you can leave this folded in half, or you can unfold it for cutting now. This is going to kind of go out of the frame a little bit, I apologize. Okay, so when I have my strip now, I'm going to line it up, and I'm going to make it so you can see this a little better. Here we go. Sorry, it's a little crooked. I'm limited on angles. I'm using this horizontal line again for my fabric. I'm squaring up again, and I'm going to cut. Now, you do need to do some math here, so if you're not good at adding quickly in your head, write down the numbers that you need. So I want every 4.5 inches. So I'm going to go 0, 4.5, 9, 13.5, 18. Okay, those are 4.5 inch increments. Don't laugh at me if I just made a mistake there. Hopefully I didn't. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. This is leftover. So as you can see, the fat quarter is way more fabric than you need. So, but we do still need to cut these additional pieces here. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut one of these from this fabric, and I'm just going to cut one from each fat quarter until I have, let's see, there's 10 total additional pieces that I need, and I'm only have 7 fat quarters that I'm using. So I'm going to cut a couple from 2 of the fat quarters, and then I'll cut one piece from the others. So from this one, I'll go ahead and cut a couple of the 3.5 by 8.5 inch pieces. So if I'd been thinking, I would have just gone ahead and cut this when I cut the first strip, but I wasn't thinking, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm lining this up here. Oop. Oh yeah, you can hear my husband playing this video game. He plays with his friend who lives in Idaho, and they sometimes yell at each other, but it's okay. Okay, so I'm going to do 3.5 by 8.5 inch pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a 3.5 inch strip. Okay, cut off that squared up edge. Here's my leftover. And so the question is, like, what do you do with leftovers? I like to save all of my leftovers together and then use them for future projects, or cut it down into scraps, put it in your scrap bin, or especially because these are holiday prints, I'm planning on making, I think, some pillows from the leftovers. If I have enough leftovers, I may make an additional quilt, because I think this collection is would be really nice for gifting to family members. So I don't know. The possibilities are endless. You can do whatever you want with the leftovers. I wish every pattern had no leftovers, but it just doesn't work out that way. Okay, so now my fabric is still folded in half, because I know I just need to cut 8.5 inches here, and there's enough that I can just cut it without unfolding it, and then I only have to cut one time. So there's my 2 8.5 inch pieces. So what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to write 2 right here next to the ones I just cut, so that I don't accidentally cut extras. So now I'm going to set my pieces aside. These are going to be set aside. Okay, so now I will show you, I'm going to cut, this is going to be my fabric B. Okay, so I'm going to look at my instructions. I need 4 3.5 by 5.5 inch pieces and 4 3.5 by 8.5 inch pieces. So if I think about it, this fat quarter from here to here. It's folded in half right now, but the total length is 22 inches, right? That's a 22-inch length. So if I do 5.5 inch, if I cut a 3.5-inch strip, can I get 4 5.5-inch pieces from it? Well, 5.5 times 4 is 22, so it'd have to be exactly, I'm going to look at my fabric and see. It's not 22. So what I could do instead is cut a 5.5-inch strip and then cut 3.5-inch pieces from that. So I'm going to do that. And then if I can't get the 5.5-inch pieces, I definitely can't get 8.5. So I'll cut a 5.5-inch strip and an 8.5-inch strip, and then I'll subcut 3.5-inch pieces from those. Does that make sense? Okay. Oh, also think about when you're cutting which direction your fabric is going to be, because this is a directional print. And yeah, so I kind of like on a quilt like this, when I have something here, let me see if I can get that to focus. Something like this is I like to have the trees go one direction this way and then the other direction that way. I actually don't like them all to be the same direction, but if you do, take that into account when you cut. And if instead of cutting a 5.5-inch piece and then subcutting 3.5-inch pieces, if I cut two 3.5-inch pieces and then cut from that, they'll go the same direction. I will show you what I mean. Okay, so I'm going to cut a 5.5-inch strip, and then I'm going to cut an 8.5-inch strip. Okay. So think about it. If I had instead, let's pretend this is 3.5 inches, and then I cut a piece from here, my trees would go that direction, right? They would be long ways like this. The trees would be right side up. Okay, so instead, I cut this 5.5-inch strip. Okay, I'm going to put this upside down because I like to have the selvage on the edge. But that's just me being crazy. So I've got the length of fabric here. Okay, this is 5.5 inches, so I need to cut 3.5-inch strip. I need to cut 3.5-inch pieces, and I need 4 of them. So I'm going to do the math in my head. I'm going to go 3.5, 7, 10.5, 14. Okay, so notice now my trees are up right side up when the fabric is long like this. And if I wanted it to go the other way, I did have enough fabric to make the directional fabric work, which is one of the reasons why I did fat quarters here. So there's my 4 5.5 by 3.5 inch pieces. Okay, and then I've got I'm going to leave it folded this time. I unfolded it last time, but it doesn't really matter. I'm lining up here. I'm going to cut, this is 8.5 inches wide, so I want so I only need to cut twice this time since it's folded in half, so 3.5 by 7. If you leave it folded, that also means less adding. So I kind of like that they're different directions, but if I had instead cut my pieces from here, it would have been like this, and they would have all been the same direction. So think about it like that. So if you want, I'm going to write it on here. Same type of thing, you can just pause right there if you want to write that down or screenshot it. That very, very professional and fancy way. So I just told you how to make them go the same direction like this. If not, if you don't care like me, or actually I kind of like it this way because I feel like it gives the quilt a little bit of movement. If you're using like a really big stripe or something, I do think it's better to have them go the same direction. But this is pretty minor shape. A B. This is my C. Right? Okay, I'm going to look here. I need 4 3.5 by 9.5 inch and 4 3.5 by 12.5 inch. Okay, I'm going to cut a 12.5 inch by width of fabric strip, cut 12.5 inch. And then I'm going to cut a 3.5 inch. Okay, I'm going to lay this 12.5 inch piece out, and I need 4 3.5 by 12.5 inch pieces. So I have my 12.5 inch pieces, so I'm now going to cut 4 3.5 inch strips. So 3.5, 7, 10.5, 14. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I have this piece left over. Okay, I'm going to set these over here, and I'm going to cut this down to 9.5 inches, my leftover piece. So I'm squaring up the edge here, 9.5 in the next room, and get 2 3.5 inch pieces. So there's 2 of my 3.5 by 9.5 inch pieces. And then I will cut the other 2 from my 3.5 inch. Square up 9.5. So 3.5 by 9.5. There's C, B, and A with a couple of corner pieces cut. And see how I've mixed color, scale, and value for the block so that there's some variety there. This is the ruler that I use when I'm not using the stripology ruler. So it's like a half, about half and half, because it just kind of depends on what I'm doing. So here is going to be my fabric A for these blocks. So same thing. I need to cut 4 4.5 inch squares, and then I need to cut something else from this block. So I could cut 1 or 2, just whatever. I need to cut something. I have not pre-planned fabric placement on this quilt, so if you have, then maybe you know which pieces you want to cut from, but I haven't. Okay, so the way that I do this, some people will square up first, but I like to cut my strip and then square up the edge of it. So I know I need to cut a 4.5 inch strip here. So I line up some of these vertical or horizontal hash marks on my ruler with the top of my fabric, and then make sure that I have more than 4.5 inches over here so that I can trim. Someone was just trying to come in here, one of my children. Okay, so I'm going to cut here, and then, oh, that's my iron turning off. I flipped it over very carefully so that it didn't get jostled. And now I'm going to line up the 4.5 inch line here with the edge of the fabric, and it's now trimmed. Okay, and since this is still, I haven't moved this, I'm going to go ahead and cut a 3.5 inch strip from this fabric for some of my extra corner pieces. So I'm going to fold this, set that aside, future project use. Okay, so I'm going to keep this folded. I'm going to do exactly the same thing to subcut the 4.5 inch pieces. Line up the hash marks on my ruler with the edge of the fabric. Make sure I have more than 4.5 inches over here, including the selvage. You don't want to include any selvage in that. Mine is still attached. So I'm going to do 4.5 inches. Carefully flip that around. 4.5 inches. And this all gets faster, easier, and more accurate the more you do it. So if you get, and using a good ruler really makes a difference. So I think it's worth investing in a good ruler. So there's 2, since it's folded fabric. If not, you may need to square up again. Okay, that's my leftover piece. Save all the scraps. There's 4 of those. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut a 3.5 by 12.5 inch piece that was left over here. So I'm actually just going to turn my ruler sideways so that it's 12.5 inches. Okay, so I'm cutting off this edge here. I just made sure I had more than 12.5 inches. And then here I'm lining up the horizontal hash marks here and the 12.5 inch vertical hash marks here. There we go. So now I have one of my corner extra pieces. I'm going to mark on my sheet that I did one of those. And I'm gonna set that aside. This red print is really pretty. This would make a great binding, which maybe I'll have to buy some because I don't have any more, but I might do that. It's very festive. Okay, so for fabric B, same thing. I need 4 3.5 by 5.5, 4 3.5 by 8.5. And I'm just going to do the same thing I did before and cut a 5.5 inch strip and an 8.5 inch strip. This is an 8.5 inch wide ruler, so it will be the length of the ruler, or the width of the ruler. So 5.5 inches, I'm doing the same thing. Line up the horizontal line with the top of the fabric. Make sure I've got at least 5.5 inches over here. Cut, flip it over, five and a half inches. Okay, and 8.5 inches. There we go. Okay, so one shortcut, if you want to do this, is I know I need 3.5 inch pieces from both of these, even though they're not the same size. If I stack them and line them up at the bottom, this is still just 4 layers of fabric, so that's not too much, even for my dull rotary cutter. If your rotary cutter is sharp, then go for probably 6 and be okay. Mine's not. So now I'm going to cut 3.5 inch pieces from here, and I need 4. Since they're both folded in half, I just need to make 2 cuts. So cut very carefully, since we got all kinds of layers here. Flip it around. 3.5 inches. Cut. Here, I have 2 of the smaller pieces, 2 of the bigger pieces. Now I'm going to cut one more time. Okay, 3.5 inches. Okay. A bit extra. So now I've got 4. See, double side, because I had it folded. 4 of those, 4 of those. B. Now fabric C. Right here. This is a pretty print. It reminds me of Frozen. Okay, 4 3.5 by 9.5. 4 3.5 by 12.5. Okay, you can either just get a bigger ruler out, which I have a 16.5 inch square ruler, so I could use that. Or I have 2 rulers here that add up to 12.5 inches. This is a 4 inch, and this is an 8.5. An 8.5 plus 4 is 12.5. So I just set them next to each other, and together they're 12.5 inches. So I'm going to make the first cut. Okay. Now I'm going to very carefully, since this is kind of a big piece, flip it over so I can square it up. And do the same thing. 2 rulers. I am a minimalist when it comes to rulers. And so if I don't use it, I don't like to have it in my sewing room. So it's useful to be able to add rulers together like this if you need something bigger and you don't have it. You don't need to just buy it for those rare projects. So here I'm going to cut a 3.5 inch strip, just like we did with the stripology ruler. This is an extra scrap. I'm going to set my 3.5 inch piece aside, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut. And I'm laying it out like this because it's a little bit more fabric efficient than cutting it in half. And because I'm sure it will be fine, but I just mentally like to do it this way. I probably, after quilting for a long time and making lots of quilts, have some weird quirks that I do that don't make sense, but I do them anyway. Okay, so this is 12.5 inches, and I need 4 3.5 by 12.5. So I'm going to cut 3.5. Oh, it sounds like viola practice is over. Okay, there's 1. So you can see how much faster using the stripology ruler is. And, you know, as expensive as it is, I think it's like $60 or $70, or I don't even know, maybe it's even more than that. You know, your time is worth money. So if it takes you twice as long to cut out a quilt with a regular ruler, I think it's important to value your time and energy. So, I mean, you can't, that ruler, I don't use it for everything, but I do use it a lot. So I need one more. Oh, I almost just miscut that. Good thing I noticed. Remember, measure twice, cut once. Almost did 2.5 inch. Okay, there we go. Okay, now remember, I'm going to cut this down to 9.5 inches, and because I don't have this ruler's only 8.5 inches, I'm going to add again. I'm going to do 4 plus 5.5 to get me to 9.5. Isn't that what I want? Yeah. So I'm just lining this left edge up. I've got 4 plus 5.5 is 9.5. There we go. And then I'm going to subcut the 3.5 inch pieces from this. And like, this ruler is big enough to cut my strips from, but this ruler is not as stable as this ruler. So even though it's more annoying to pick up and move around, like I'm trying to move that the same way, it doesn't. It just, I get more accurate results when I use it. So now I'm going to subcut 2 3.5 inch pieces. And this fabric is technically, it's directional because these little snowflakes are longer this way, but this is one that you wouldn't really even notice in a quilt. So I wouldn't even really think of this as a directional print. Okay, and then from this 3.5 inch piece, I'm going to cut to 9.5 inch. And I'm just going to keep it folded. Cut off this. And then flip it over. I've got my 4 plus my 5.5. There we go. Okay, so now I have my fabric C, my fabric B, and my fabric A for this block. And I did, again, pretty good-ish mix of scale. Like, this is a busier print, and these are both very not busy prints. And so I think it will look good in the block. So I will do a video for cutting your quilt if you're using the regular, the not fat quarter version, and it will be a little bit different because in the other version we make big blocks and then cut them into squares instead of having to cut each block individually. So that's it for the fat quarter one.